Hi everybody, welcome to my first ever episode of my Dungeon Boss Face-Off series. This was an idea that was suggested a couple of months ago in terms of kind of a subset of the Epic Priority series, or the Hero Priority series, if you will. Essentially what it's going to do is it's going to take two individual heroes and pit them together. I usually did a lot of numbered crunching as far as my priority series goes, and because those things change so much, new heroes being added or new skills being updated because of epics and such like that, it's tough for that to be a permanent facet of the analysis here. So what we're actually going to do now is we're going to focus on just two heroes at once. Maybe in some cases, depending if there's three that are very similar, maybe we would do three, but we're going to try and keep it very basic with just a simple face-off. So this pilot episode, what we're going to be looking at is going to be Igorok versus Valkin. And the reason that this came up is somebody asked me they basically do the same thing. They lead off with their attacks and they freeze. So which one is going to be better to use? Who should we actually, focus on? Or in some cases, which one is just flat out better? So we're going to look at just some of the basic stuff that I use to, crunch some numbers. We're not going to do any serious calculations or anything like that, but we will look at some of the values and see how things actually stack up. And I'm not sure if anybody really ever takes a close look at the actual stats themselves, but there are some interesting things to point out that hopefully it just gives you a little bit of insight into what sort of things happen when you actually use these heroes. So let's start out with just looking at some of the core aspects of Igorok versus Valkin. Yes, their main first attacks are both meant to essentially freeze. And so let's break things down a little bit further. In order to do so, we can ignore the runes on here. I'm going to be looking at just the overall base stats. So fortunately, both of mine are already 6-starred, so they're on even playing field there. And they're both fully ascended as well. So let's start with Igorok and look at his attack. So attack is pretty much everything in this game as far as dealing out damage. If we look at his base attack is 2263. So commit that to memory. And then we look at Valkin instead. And sorry about the scrolling. That's just how it is until we get hero sorting. 2263 compared to Valkin. Valkin's a little bit different because he does have a passive, this Dwarven Fervor, that adds to it even without anything else. So we do get to count this in addition to the base. So his base attack is 2094, which is lower than Igorok, but Dwarf Fervor adds 22%. I did do the calculation ahead of time on this. 2094 plus 22% is 2555. So we're comparing 2500 attack to 2200 attack for Igorok. Massive, massive difference. So in terms of basic attacks, unless one of them has a way higher percentage that it deals of the damage, Valkin definitely has a much better attack than Igorok. If we look at the abilities, his basic swing, it does not give us an actual number in terms of what damage it does. We'll get more into that in just a little bit, but right now we're looking at 2500 attack versus 2200 attack. They both have identical rune loadouts, so no matter what you do, if you have identical runes, Valkin is always going to dish out more damage on a basic attack. That's not to say he's going to deal more damage, but he will always deal out more damage on a basic attack. So right now, advantage goes to Valkin. Defense. Let's start with Valkin this time. Again, the Dwarven Fervor has to be counted in here. 2273 plus 22% gives us a whopping 2770-ish. So 2700 defense versus Igorok. And we're going to give Igorok the benefit of the doubt and consider endgame content here, which being he's going to get 30% defense for his epic. So his defense of 1998 plus 30% is going to give us 2589. So even base defense, Valkin beats him by 200 defense. What does that mean as far as survivability goes? It means Valkin's going to take less damage on literally every single hit because of that. They're both armored, so there's no plus or minus there. And basically neither of them is magical, so they're going to take all the exact same damage from pretty much everything. So that leads us to something like health then. Health, Igorok has a base health of 6345, and Valkin has, scrolling, Valkin has a base health of 4188. So we're looking at over 2,000 difference in health. That's largely going to be because Igorok is a tank and Valkin is a warrior. I would say health is largely negligent in PvP. When it comes to going against Viperia, they're both dead, no matter what the health is. They could both have 20,000 health, and they're both dead. When it comes to Lily, they're both dead there as well. Oxidized Sap is going to absolutely destroy them. So 6,000 health versus 4,000 health, not a big difference. I will tell you my own personal experience with auto-run teams and running the Shatter team into Lava Academy. Valkin dies vastly more times than Igorok does. So in terms of max health and survivability, we kind of have to weigh defense versus max health. I would say survivability is going to go to Igorok just because he has more health. But his defense, all things considered, is not even close to Valkin. So survivability we're going to give to Igorok just because he is going to survive more in the long run. And I've run many, many, many auto runs of Lava Academy. Igorok rarely dies. Valkin dies every now and then. So next up, let's look at things like their actual attacks and their skills. This is where things are going to break down and give us some tie breaks here. Now, I mentioned not many people actually look at the numbers and see how these things actually calculate. I was doing some poking around with this, and I wanted to start with Igorok here. Because after you start looking at the base values, let's just have a quick peek here. Igorok's attack, base attack, 2263. Abilities, Polar Pounding, 2263. I was very, 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 very curious about that because I never really paid attention to the numbers myself. Now, obviously, when he does an attack, we're going to see way more than 2263. That's just kind of how it is. But what this tells me is that Polar Pounding at its base is essentially going to do what I would assume is 100% of whatever the hero's attack is. So he's going to dish out basically all of what his attack is. Valkin, on the other hand, and that's probably kind of a spoiler, being that we have an on the other hand. Valkin's ability to war, 1047. Where does 1047 fit in? Stats. Attack, 2094. Divided by 2, 1047. So, his base attack, or his first skill, does 50% of whatever the attack is. So in terms of raw damage output, which one can do more? If you put them on the same defensive team and they're both going to go and they're both ruined out exactly the same, Igorok is going to do more damage. That's a one-hit wonder. So if we consider a single round, assuming that either of them gets to attack in PvP, Igorok is better. He will do more damage, and that's just cut and dry. He does twice as much damage. There's no way to look at that differently. He has twice as much damage. Now, after the rolls and all the augments and stuff go on there, I would expect that obviously it's going to be more than just 1,000 or 2,000 damage. But Igorok does more damage. So right now, if we're talking about PvP defense, use Igorok. He is better as far as damage goes. But again, we have to assume that they are going to get the same opportunities, I guess. Now, after that, I didn't look at after this because what I noticed with Tooth and Nail for Valkin, 1518, I didn't do the calculation to see where this actually falls. I'm guessing what this is 1.5 his or 0.75 his base attack, because this looks like it's about 50% more than what this one was. So if this was half of it and this one was 50% more than that, I think it's like a 0.75. I'm not going to do the calculation on it. But he does 15, 18, and he hits him twice. So that's basically, 1.5 times whatever the base attack is. Igorok's second actual attack is Arctic Rush, does 1810, and it just does extra if they're chilled. Where does 1810 fall in? When we look at the attack, it really didn't resonate with me what 1810 is here. It seems like, if we had to do a quick calculation, I can certainly do it. 1810 divided by 2263. Which is 80% of his attack. Now, if that's what the actual calculation is, they're not giving us a lot of the tooltips there, but still, he does more of his primary attack than what Valkin does. So, for PvP, as far as sheer damage goes, assuming that they're going to get off both of their attacks, which is not necessarily the case, because we have to remember with Valkin, look at Igorok first. Igorok in PvP defense is going to go Polar Pounding, Arctic Rush, sequentially. Valkin, unfortunately, does not do that, and since I don't have the tooltips for Valkin, I can't give you the exact numbers for the other ones. But when Valkin is going to be on PvP defense, he's going to go to War, and then he's going to do Steel Sharpened Steel, which buffs some stuff, but it's going to also switch the War to Cavalry. So we can't really assume that he's going to jump right into Tooth and Nail, unfortunately. So we can't really compare those. So as far as, again, pure damage numbers, Igorok will go attack, Valkin goes attack, and then buff. So, again, PvP defense-wise, we do have Igorok dealing more damage, assuming that they both get 2 turns. The last thing to consider, then, is basically PvE concepts. In PvE, hands down, Valkin is better. Not even a question. The reason being, his energy expenditure is vastly superior. Igorok's skills are 8 cooldown, 5 cooldown, and 6 cooldown. Total of 19. Valkin has 3, 4, and 4 for a total of 11. So in terms of total damage, Valkin will get to use skills much, much more frequently. Even if he's, and we already saw with basic attacks, Valkin does higher basic attack. So we know that in PvE, Valkin will destroy Igorok across the board. If you ran this out over a total of 50, 75, 100 turns, we calculated out all the damage, I'm sure Valkin would vastly exceed Igorok. Part of that is because Igorok is a tank. I would expect a warrior to do more damage than a tank. So that only leaves us with one other thing here, and that is any extra passives or things that we should consider that would make one versus the other better. With the current meta in PvP, we cannot put a price on Perfect Swing. Trying to hit Arya, trying to hit Masuda Kira and Shadowblade is incredibly challenging. And being that either of these guys is only going to get probably one chance to attack, we want to hit those guys. So in terms of PvP, Valkin is going to be better. The reason being is Igorok is likely to miss, and that's just the downside of it. So if you're trying to hit Arya, and you're trying to hit Masuda Kira, Valkin is going to guarantee that, with the exception of a few things with the off balance. But Valkin is definitely better there. In addition to this, we have Fear Immune. Again, this, as far as PvP, huge issue, because with Shade being able to fear, with Lupina able to fear, and I think, I want to say one other one. I was thinking Hopper, but Hopper does a disease. But that fear is something that's awful out there. So we don't want to be able to have that fear with some of those Lupina teams. So this here, again, goes advantage to Valkin versus Igorok. For other things, the lead by example is certainly a great one, because it's a small chance to have basically a second free attack from anybody else on your team, which is just more damage. We don't see this in PvP very much, just because of how those play out. PvE though, on auto runs, this one here is priceless. Igorok, let's go back to him. Igorok's passives. He has one. Cannot be frozen. Valkin can be frozen. Igorok cannot. In PvP, you're never going to see him get frozen anyways. Hardly anybody is using freeze-based attacks in PvP. They're just not the norm anymore. Chance to freeze on any crit. This crit is with basic attacks in PvE. That's garbage. It's not going to be basically anything. In the actual PvE environment, I don't think freeze on crit is better than the Inspire Ally. So again, advantage Valkin. Armored we had, and we do have Epic Shatter Team. Now, Igorok has the ability to do extra damage towards frozen targets. Again, PvP, it's nice, but if you're running an all-water team in PvP, you're pretty much toast anyways. It's just not going to work. So PvE, it's great. PvP, it's not. So looking at those two then, we have a lot of balancing between them. So they're two very well-balanced heroes in my opinion. Had one of them not been a tank and the other a warrior, I think it would have basically made one of them pretty much obsolete. But they do have a little bit different functionality between the two. So where do I stand in terms of which one to use? I've already said it before, PvE, Valkin hands down. If you're running a PvE dungeon, usually they're 4, 5, 6 rooms long, you want those skills up whenever possible, especially if you're running difficult ones. The more times you have skills available, the easier it is to manage. In PvP, we have a couple things that we're considering. We want to basically who can dish out the most damage and get guaranteed damage. Igorok is going to deal more damage. That is definitely the case on PvP defense. He definitely will. However, his ability to hit is going to be heavily influencing my decision here. Because almost all PvP involves Masudakira or Shadowblade in some fashion, especially if Shadowblade goes first and he does his evasion, he could go and opt to kill anybody else on that team, and Igorok is likely to miss him. However, you wouldn't be able to say the same thing about Valkin. Valkin would still hit Shadowblade even if he's evading. So, on PvP defense, my gut says to use Valkin as well. My experience with what I've seen with PvP defenses out there is to also use Valkin as well, based on what I've seen. I do not see too many Igorok defenses anymore. I also do not see too many Igoroks trying to come into my house and attack either. So one other thing to consider, both of these guys have the exact same rarity as far as finding them. So neither of one is any higher as far as priority goes. Maybe you'd consider Igorok a little bit higher because of his epic, but personally the epic really just gets him on par with Valkin in some of the other areas. It's not even really a huge benefit in my opinion. It's not necessary for him to be on an auto-run team to have the epic, and then it doesn't really help with anything PvP related. So this first face-off here, if I had to stamp my seal of approval on it in terms of whether you should be using Valkin or if you should be using Igorok, my vote is for Valkin for two reasons. One, Valkin fits into a dwarf team, and a second one, Valkin is featured in the heroic portal more than Igorok is. He's kind of yesterday's news. So if this was a year and a half ago, definitely Igorok, but right now you want to choose Valkin. He's got a higher base attack, he's got a higher base defense, he's got better energy use, and his second skill, even though it's not an attack, will buff the rest of the team as well. And just in the long run, he does much more damage. So hopefully this was somewhat informative. If you have suggestions on who we should analyze next, definitely leave a note in the comments, and I will definitely take a look at it. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching this video and supporting my channel. If you like this video, please show your continued support by hitting that like button, and be sure to check out both my YouTube channels for new content all the time. And always remember, peace is a lie, there's only passion. We'll see you next time.